Breaking Bad. It's either the show you love or the show everyone tells you they love. Critics everywhere have hailed the show as bringing quality and depth to everyday television, and that's why it's a perfect show to analyse as part of my new series on YouTube. In The Symbolism of, we find the deeper meaning of modern day media and literature, which pretty much covers everything that can be considered art. Before we dive in, guys, I just want to add that since we are looking at incredibly deep and complex pieces of literature like Breaking Bad, it's absolutely fine if my view conflicts with yours. In fact, it's great. Share your opinion, write a comment, make a video response. Interpreting a work comes just as much from us as it does from the work itself. But let's begin. Breaking Bad follows Walter White, an underqualified, underpaid chemistry teacher who gets terminal lung cancer and starts making meth to make money for his family before he dies. However, as he is embroiled further and further into the meth industry, Walter's actions become less and less justifiable. As a whole, Breaking Bad is a refutation of the concept the end justifies the means, a philosophy that has recently become very popular in modern day literature. The philosophy is usually put forward as the only way forward, as the protagonist uses extreme methods to achieve ends that are unobtainable with the red tape of current government authorities, such as saving the galaxy, solving an investigation, etc., etc. But I digress. As Walter enters the meth industry, he forms a dual identity. On the one hand, we have modest, caring, family man Walter White. On the other, we have Heisenberg, the ruthless and diabolical drug dealer. The show enforces the duality to Walter's character through the motif of reflections, which begins pretty much as soon as Walter contracts cancer in episode 1. The dual Walter Whites in shots represents the two forces colliding in Walter's mind, and that's where the choice of the name Heisenberg becomes truly interesting. Werner Heisenberg was a particularly influential physicist who lived from 1901 to 1975 and created Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which states the more we are able to tell about one element of a particle, the less we will be able to know about another. For example, if we know so much about the velocity of a particular particle, we will be able to know so much less about its position. Sorry for the physics, guys, I actually know as little as you, but stay with me, this does all link back to Walter White. We have to deal with Walter White, in fact, as if he were a particle, with the family man Walter being one element and the drug dealer Heisenberg being another. The more powerful and stable Heisenberg becomes, the less powerful and stable Walter White becomes in his family life, and vice versa. We see this quite clearly in Season 2, Episode 4 Days Out, in which Walter finds out his cancer is in remission. However, instead of expressing relief or happiness, we see this. What happened? Walter's family man identity has been strengthened, his position with his family secured. So according to the uncertainty principle, Heisenberg's place has become less stable and more volatile. That is, in plot terms, Walt can no longer justify his place in the meth industry, but by this point he's addicted. Look at his distorted reflection at the end. This ugly representation depicts the face Walt sees himself as, and maybe even wants to see himself as. He enjoyed the lack of clarity ahead of him, the unknown, and he hated the weakness he had endured earlier in his life. And in the beginning, he was weak. He was a pushover. Look at these angles where he cleans his student's car. High angles are shown to make him look weak and powerless. By the end, despite his wrecked sense of morality, Walter is a powerful guy. Look at these angles. Low and close angles make Walter fill up the shot, making him appear extremely intimidating. But the consequences to this power Walt gains through the Heisenberg persona destabilizes his family identity, as well as harming many other people around him. For example, at the end of Season 2, a plane collision occurs as the indirect result of Walt's actions, and several key symbols arise. The teddy bear doll, for one, obviously the toy of a now deceased child. The innocence conveyed in this image has been burnt and scarred, leaving an ugly thing behind. And furthermore, The bear has been split into two halves by the incident. It obviously represents Walter's guilt, but there's more to it. Does it remind you of anything? It should. The bear is clearly a symbol for Walter White himself, split by two personalities. Formerly innocent and harmless, Walter has been corrupted by the darker side within him, and the consequences are beyond his comprehension. This symbol of half-wrecked faces serves as a mark of Walter's influence throughout the show, and it is seen on several further occasions. Each as the face becomes more known to us. For example, Gus Fring's face after Walt sets a trap for him, or, most devastatingly, Jesse's face after he is tortured by the Nazis. Each of these faces, the teddy bear, Gus, and Jesse, are progressively closer to Walter himself, and show his declining morality as he begins to hurt those closer and closer to him and us with lessening remorse. Walter slowly begins to accept the darkness of Heisenberg as the show progresses. See, for example, Season 3 episode Fly, in which Walt hunts down a fly in his lab, refusing to cook until the contamination has been cleared. Walt's obsessive search is representative of his own personal need to remain untainted by his exploits in the meth industry. Walt's crazed looking around represents both his desperation and budding insanity. By the end, Walter makes a crucial decision to ignore the fly.
He's not coming down. He's staying up there forever. Jesse, come down.
I'm so close.
Let it go. We need to cook.
What about the contamination?
It's all contaminated.
Walt has chosen to accept the guilt that comes with Heisenberg. In our final shot of the episode, we see Walt lying on his bed, looking up at the ceiling, where a fly sits on his fire detector. This shows Walt has chosen a life where guilt and contamination are omnipresent, and he has chosen to ignore it. By the final episode of the show, Walt has slipped completely into Heisenberg, with the family man Walter White gone almost completely. He is hated by his family and is a fugitive from the police. The final shot shows Walt leaving a smear of blood on some meth instruments, before collapsing with a reverse zoom shot, pulling out of the meth lab, showing Walt at peace. Walt has left his mark, per se, on the meth lab, and it is where he belongs, where he is at peace. Furthermore, the last mirror image of the show depicts Walter's reflection on a meth instrument, allowing Heisenberg to die with Walter White, the family man. At this point, Walt's means, making meth, have driven further from his end, his family, than the original Walter White possibly could have. But Walter isn't the only character who develops through the show. Jesse Pinkman, Walt's meth-cooking partner, changes just as dramatically. At the beginning of the series, Jesse is a bit of a goof, however becomes quite complex as the series progresses. When Jesse's girlfriend ODs at the end of Season 2, while Jesse is sleeping next to her, Jesse becomes traumatized by her death. Throughout the series, the reappearance of Jane's cigarette marks Jesse's depression. The literal mark on Jane's cigarette represents Jane's psychological mark on Jesse. It's also nice that the mark has been left on a used cigarette, showing how little of her is left to comfort him. The stability and happiness she once gave him collapses as she disappears from his life. Further in the series, Jesse's self-hate progresses to a level where he sees himself as a villain, when he shaves his head almost completely. This symbolizes Jesse seeing himself as irredeemable, a thug, and a much more raw character. By shaving his head, indeed, it parallels Walter shaving his own head at the end of Season 1, where he creates the alter ego, Heisenberg. To end, I just want to show some really nice symbolic moments that don't really contribute to the overarching story, but more just the moment. For example, Gilligan's use of colour to represent characters and their motivation. Walter's shift from white to black to show his change in morality. Hank's orange to represent at first humour, but later a fire and burning passion to catch Heisenberg. Jesse wears all grey after Jane's death, representing his depression. Skylar wears beige colours further in the series to represent how, although she is somewhat a victim of her husband, she has also become morally tainted. Walter is often seen in green, representing both his quest for money and his greed. Some other moments were especially powerful to me. For example, in Season 1 episode Grey Matter, when Walter's refusing to undergo chemotherapy, when he looks at Skylar's bedside table, we see books on cancer treatment literally being placed over baby care. This symbolizes Skylar putting more importance on Walt than their baby, and this is what prompts him to undergo chemotherapy. Or in Season 5, Episode 51, when Skylar attempts suicide, we see water flooding around her, and her dress spreading out like a flower, and all the sound is muffled. We can understand in this poignant moment that Skylar is seeking peace and isolation, allowing her to relax, to be able to see beauty again, and let her metaphorical petals out. The petal-like formation is crushed by Walt, the reason for her trauma and attempted suicide in the first place. So that's Breaking Bad, one of the best shows to be on television. I feel even after writing this, there's so much left to cover. Other symbolic moments, other characters' developments, Hank's depression and slow recovery from PTSD, Gus Fring and his strange blend of professionalism and brutality. Perhaps I can cover this on a later day. Perhaps one of you could do it for me. Again, if you disagree with me or what I've said, or have something to add, write me a comment, make a video response. The very nature of symbolism is interpretive and highly subjective, and there is nothing better to interpret.